はい、皆様、こんにちは。お忙しいところ、米国大豆ミールのウェビナーにご参加いただき、誠にありがとうございます。アメリカ大豆輸出協会 US Soybean Export Council、略して USEC の日本代表を務めております西村と申します。今日は NHK グローバルメディアサービスさんに、通訳をお願いして、NHK さんのスタジオからウェビナーを行っております。今日は120名以上の方、北は北海道、南は九州までご参加いただいております。また、当方のスピーカーもロンドンやベトナムに出張中ですが、参加していただいております。本日はご案内しました通り、3つテーマがございまして、1つ目、米国産大豆の需給について、2つ目、米国産大豆ミールの特性及び他国産比較の有利性について、最後に、米国産大豆のサステナビリティについて3人の講演を行います。3人の講演の後に Q&A の時間がございますので、その時には3人にオンラインで登場してもらいます。一つ訂正がございます。今回はチャットではなく Q&A という下の方にございますが、こちらの方に、ご質問を書き入れていただきたいと思います。チャットではなく Q&A の方にクリックをして質問を入れてください。では、まずはじめにアメリカ大豆輸出協会 USEC 本部のエグゼクティブディレクター、マーケットアクセス&ストラテジー担当で、北東アジアレジョナルディレクターのロザリンド・リークよりご挨拶を申し上げます。
Ohayou gozaimasu. My name is Rosalind Leek. I'm the Regional Director for Northeast Asia. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the soybean meal seminar that we're hosting today. I am very sorry to not be able to join you as I am currently in London attending the International Grains Council meeting. But wanted to take this opportunity to just, again, thank you for participating in today's seminar, but also just to express our gratitude for the long-term partnership we have with the Japanese soy sector, whether that be the food sector, the feed sector, the crushing sector, or the animal agriculture sector. So thank you for being a long-term partner and customer. We started our operations back in 1956 in Tokyo with our very first international audience, and over these last 68 years, it has been our pleasure to continue to work with you all to address the most relevant issues of the day. I hope you'll come away from the seminar with a better understanding of the current situation as it relates to supply and demand for U.S. soy, whether it be beans or meal, as well as some of the new research we have on the nutritional value for U.S. soybean meal. But thank you again for participating today. I wish you a very successful conference and look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.
Good morning, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you all join us today for this important U.S. soybean meal webinar. My name is Enrique Mazon, Deputy Director for our Agricultural Trade Office here at the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo. After today's seminar, I'm confident that you will have gained valuable insights into the tremendous benefits of U.S. soybean meal. As we are all aware, the shift towards biofuel production from renewable and sustainable feedstocks is an imperative step in addressing global climate change. Despite occasional negative narratives, it's crucial to recognize this as a tremendous opportunity for the global agricultural sector. by enhancing agricultural crop production and expanding end markets, we can substantially bolster global food security. Our esteemed speakers will delve into this topic further today. Additionally, there persists a misconception within the feed industry regarding the quality of soybean meal derived from U.S. soybeans, often citing lower crude protein values. To put it very simply, it's essential to understand the digestible amino acid content, which is paramount for feed efficacy, cannot solely be assessed by crude protein levels. U.S. soybean meal boasts a superior profile of essential digestible amino acids, leading to denser diets even at lower crude protein rates. This distinctive nutrient composition renders soybean meal derived from U.S. soybeans exceptionally valuable compared to its counterparts from other sources. This ultimately contributes to enhanced profitability of your operations. I eagerly anticipate further insights from our speakers on this matter. Once again, I extend my gratitude for your active participation in today's seminar and for your steadfast support as customers of U.S. soybeans. I encourage you to continue crushing U.S. soybeans and even to increase the utilization of soybean meals derived from U.S. soybeans, thereby contributing to both the growth of the industry and the sustainability of our agricultural practices. Thank you very much, and please enjoy today's seminar.
はい、エンリケさん、どうもありがとうございました。
あり
それでは
がとうございます。
最初の講演者、マーティ・ルイカの米国産大豆の需給についてプレゼンテーションのビデオを流します。彼はザ・プロエクスポーターネットワーク社の代表で、穀物の需給分析、合併、買収などのプロジェクトの専門家でございます。
Good morning. I'm Marty Ruikka. I'm really looking forward to this discussion and also later to your questions. I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started right away. So U.S. soybean production and crush is going to be our focus. To talk about that, I'm going to also spend some time talking about world crush. With respect to production, this map is harmonized to the U.S. crop year. So this is the 121 million metric tons we expect to produce that's in the ground right now. And then South America would be the crop that they're going to plant in October and harvest early next year. So our production number is up. We'll talk about why that number is up. With respect to soybean meal production, we've had an increase in crush in the U.S. and meal production is going up in the U.S. Also, there's an increase that we're going to see in Argentina. Now, the 2.6 million metric tons of increased meal production in the U.S. is from our increased crushing capacity. In Argentina, the increased crush is because they had such a poor year the previous year with the bad harvest and in the La Nina that they just didn't get to crush the normal amount. So this is reflecting Argentina returning to normal more than anything else. when we look at total trade of soybeans and soybean meal, I've plotted a 30-year trend, a 20-year trend, and a 10-year trend. The 30-year trend and the 20-year trend are very close together. The 10-year trend is down slightly. So when you think about, that we've gone through this commodity super cycle, an inflation cycle, we've gone through trade wars, COVID, and the war in the Black Sea. So there's a lot of complexity. And on top of that, South America had a 3-year La Nina. So that probably accounts for some reduced supply and some slight change to the downside in the growth of trade. So total trade in soybeans and soybean meal is still growing. It's just, our 10-year trend is slightly below the longer term trend. When I look at China for their total soybean imports, you can see that they've grown to about 108 million metric tons. And in some ways, this is a bit of a surprise. Before the last couple of years, before we had good data on the last couple of years, we thought that China is sort of stuck at importing 100 million metric tons. The and the exception when I would talk about over the last 3 years that China being kind of a ceiling of 100 million metric tons imports, the exceptions were if they have a bad crop in their soybean production. And almost every year, China produces 20 million metric tons of food grade beans. So if they needed some extra food grade beans, that could increase that number over 100. Also, if they're going to be building stocks in their security reserves, that would be a reason to go over. And I think that might be the case here. I mean, we can't know for sure, but I just, want you to see the big difference from, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, how fast China was growing. In this period up through 2018, which was the trade war year, they had been growing on average 6.6 million metric tons a year. And in the decade, the last decade, that growth rate has slowed down quite a bit. Also looking at total meat production in China, it's very flat. And if meat production is flat, the domestic Chinese market does not need soybean meal, so they don't need to crush more. So again, I think imports over 100 million metric tons are probably going to reserves and not necessarily to increased crush. Total vegetable oil consumption is relatively flat now for 5 years after a really steady long-term growth curve. So again, I think this argues that China is probably not increasing the crush, even though they've increased their total imports. Recently, in a Science and Technology Daily report, we learned that China now has 700 million metric tons of grain and oilseed storage. This is a huge number. It's grown quite a bit. There's a lot of detail in this note, so I put the whole note into the presentation so you can read the details. But I want you to think about the size of that. Annually, for the whole world trade, if you add up traded tons of corn, soybean meal, and wheat, that equals about 750 million metric tons. China has that much in storage. So they can store almost 1 full year's of global trade. It's really an astonishing number. And if we just jump back and look at, why has China gone over 100 million metric tons of imports? I think it has to do with filling up these new reserves. And this article talks about that a little bit. Now, turning to the U.S., we have some increased acreage this year for soybeans, which is a big help. We're still looking at kind of a hard ceiling of 180 million acres as the max for the U.S. We're going to be slightly below that this year. The soybean yield at this time of year, we're only talking about trend yields. Where there's been some weather challenges, but not, dramatic weather challenges. When you go back all the way to 2019, when we had a tremendous amount of prevented plant, and then every year since 2019, we've had challenges in at least, one major part of the Corn Belt or another, and additional prevented plant. So weather has not been good, but we've still been very close to trend. We haven't put in a bad crop of soybeans, even though the last couple of years we were slightly below trend. So crop technology is important. Right now, our supply demand tables are reflecting a trend yield of 52.4 bushels per acre. So the soybean production change in the U.S. this year is going to be very big. You can see that almost everywhere where we grow soybeans, there's an increased production. That's coming from the fact that, we didn't have a trend yield last year. It was slightly below trend, and we're forecasting a trend yield. And also the acreage is increasing almost 3 million acres this year versus last year. When I look at the supply demand table, we can get into some of the increases in crush. So year over year, it looks like we're going to crush an extra 125 million bushels. That will be, the new crush plants coming online this year. Some of them will be on for partial year, so that's all been adjusted into this number. With a bigger area planted, we're going to get a bigger harvested area, and hopefully, trend yield will give us a pretty big increase, in the production. Right now, we're projecting a carryout to be 435 million bushels, which would be a pretty big carryout compared to, the last 5 years. So that's quite a change. Exports of whole beans in the U.S. are projected at 1.8 billion bushels. When I look at the grain movement inside the U.S., these are after crush. These gray bubbles are the amount of soybean bushels in millions that can move from each state. And the main places they're going to go are to the PNW, Mexico, the Gulf, a little bit off the eastern seaboard, and some to the southeast states for crushing for our poultry and hog industries. Here's a soybean meal supply demand table for this next year. And you can see, the increases in production. And most of that increase in production is going to go to exports. So you can see that we have exports growing quite a bit. And this will be, the third year in a row where we've had pretty significant increase in soybean meal exports. The blue sky model is a PRX 10-year forecast. This is a soybean supply demand table taken from the blue sky model. In this, you can see our increased crush. So for this year, this marketing year, we're at 2.4 billion bushels of crush, and we're going to be growing that up to almost 2.9 billion bushels of crush over the next 5 years. So you can see that the schedule we have of new plants coming online. There's not going to be a big change this year to next year. We just had a couple of plants open up recently, and now it's going to be another year delay while more are under construction. Farm prices projected are listed here. These are average U.S. farm price. Here's that same information in a chart. So the increased soybean production is mostly coming from an increase in yield. And then the increased crush is noted right here for our projection of crush. Soybean meal production and use in a graphic form is shown here. We're going to have some increase in domestic use. All the new crush we have is making soybean meal more affordable in the U.S. And that's going to increase the production of meat in the U.S., which should give us more meat for exports. But most of the new crush is going to go to exports of soybean meal. One problem that the industry in the U.S. is facing right now is the huge increase in used cooking oil and tallows that are being imported. You can see how big this number is. So the people who were building new crush plants were expecting the renewable diesel and biodiesel industry to use a lot of soybean oil. And the world has responded to the U.S. demand for fats and oils by importing quite a bit of product into the U.S. There's been a really big change year over year in used cooking oil from China and then tallow from South America. The event that probably created the big crush demand is kind of interesting to us. So we looked at global price comparisons of soybean oil for North America, South America, and then palm oil from Asia. And you can see the big spread. You know, we had a bubble in the value of U.S. soy oil. So this is a U.S. Gulf value. And the same, it's a Brazilian port value. And then Malaysia and Indonesia for palm. And all of those other oils really behaved through the last year or so, you know, in unison, but we had this big divergence of the U.S. value of oil. So it's a good example of a little bit of increase or a small increase in demand can reprice the whole market. And we had the big increase in the demand, or the surprise increase in demand, was all the new renewable diesel coming online at once in the U.S. And because of the huge amount of imports that have increased, that's softened the oil price in the U.S. and brought it closer to the rest of the world. Here's the U.S. soybean farm price versus carryout to use ratio. You can see on the farm price the big increase we had in the old super cycle that ended in 2012, and then in the new super cycle. We've certainly come off of the highs on that super cycle. Now, I need to talk a little bit about the current pricing environment in the U.S. and maybe what's going on. Recently, prices in the U.S. have been going down, and we think one of the really big reasons for that is that the largest buyer of soybeans in the world, China, has the lowest bought purchase of new crop in their history as of June. So when we compare June this year to any other June, previous June in history, China has the least amount of U.S. soybeans bought, and I'm talking about new crop soybeans. So they, have a reason for that. They must think that, there's a good chance for them to buy what they need from the U.S., later in the year at a cheaper value. I don't know how that's going to work out for them. Right now, even though there's been some weather challenges, we're still forecasting a trend yield for the U.S. So with a good crop in the U.S., maybe they're right that prices are going to come down. But people have been asking about, what's going on with the current price environment. And so we think that that's a really big factor. When the largest player in the world is taking a very slow start to their annual purchases, that has a big impact on everybody else. That concludes my prepared remarks. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to your questions later.
Marty さん、ビデオが入らない。Marty さん。
Yes, I am here.
OK。今朝、あなたから E メールでブラジルのタックスの件で E メールがございましたが、その件について簡単に情報を伝えていただけますか？
You're talking about the last email I sent earlier today?
Yes.
Okay, very good. I just wanted to clarify, which there's been a lot of news. So when I made the recording for this presentation, China had not really started buying yet, and there were some sales at the end of last week that some traders thought were probably associated with China. And then Brazil has a new tax policy that went into effect, and it made the Chinese buyers stop buying Brazil beans recently. And there's been 208,000 tons of soy that were purchased very recently, like in the last few days, by China from the U.S. So, I think that China was going to start buying from the U.S. at some point anyway. Generally, it's believed by world traders that if you're going to hold beans for the long term, putting them into reserves, that the quality of the whole beans from the U.S. are the best for reserves. And I expect that China was going to sooner or later, start buying at the U.S. But this tax policy change in Brazil, just sort of kickstarted it, made it happen right now. This is a fluid environment. Brazil has a relatively new president. And I think that the traders in Brazil are letting the government know that this is a problem. And so, I don't know if this tax policy will stay in effect, but it's something that we need to pay attention to. Also, something that's really interesting, and I did not email about this, but it's worth mentioning. There's 3 export hubs in the world: North America, South America, and the Black Sea region. We've known for the last 15 years that the cost of production in the U.S. is slightly higher than the other 2 export hubs. Well, there was just brand new research put out about the current cost of production environment in Brazil was higher than the US. And that's a big change. Now, part of that is due to currency valuations. You know, a lot of Brazilian soybean production also has a second crop of corn on it. So the land is used intensely and it requires a lot of inputs. The inputs are purchased at US dollar valuations, and the dollar is very high right now. So that has probably increased the cost of production to the Brazilian farmer. In the long run, I think that will make, year over year increases in soybean area in Brazil go down. So, there's a couple of different things, in play right now that are really important to the outlook next year, and we're just going to have to pay attention to all those. But thank you for bringing that question up.
はい、どうもありがとうございました。それでは次にトーマス・ダルフォンソ博士にアメリカ産大豆ミールの特性および、多国産比較の有利性について、プレゼンをお願いいたします。彼はUSEC の動物水産養殖の担当ディレクターですが、USEC 入会前、彼は飼料工場や、動物生産者とサプライチェーンと運営、それからバイオセキュリティの分野でコンサルティングを行っていました。
I'm Tom Delfonso. I'm the Director of Animal Utilization and Aquaculture for the U.S. Soybean Export Council. Today we're going to talk about the value of U.S. soy for animal producers and aquaculture systems. What's nourishing your business? We'll talk about the value of U.S. soy in terms of its composition, its consistency, and sustainability. First, we're going to review the very old methods of measuring crude protein in soybeans and soybean meals. These methods have been around for over 100 years and are still commonly used in the industry. We're going to talk about the modern methods of measuring the composition, consistency, integrity, and quality of soybeans and soybean meal. For example, we'll be talking about the digestibility of amino acids and calories, the total composition of these essential nutrients, the value of consistency in animal feed formulation, and the value of sustainability. Traditional methods for measuring protein, such as the combustion method, Kjeldahl, and the Dumas method, are indirectly measuring protein by measuring nitrogen content. And in fact, crude protein is not the best measure of soybeans or soybean meal quality. Crude protein is made up of amino acids, and only some of these amino acids are essential. The ones that are in the dotted lines on this diagram are essential amino acids for human and animal and aquaculture nutrition. But the amino acids are not the end of the story. Those amino acids need to be available to the animal. They need to be digestible. And so what's really valuable as far as crude protein in soybeans and soybean meal is the digestibility and the availability of those nutrients that are essential, such as the essential amino acids and calories. The quality of soybeans and the soybean meal produced from those soybeans, from the very origin, from the moment of harvest, can determine quality. For example, let's talk about damaged beans. Damaged beans can come from many different sources, such as harvest conditions that cause damage. It could be immature beans. It could be foreign material. On the picture on the left-hand side, this comes from an agricultural trade journal in Argentina after a drought. And the agricultural trade journal asks, what is the quality of the beans that we are producing given the current situation in Argentina where there was a drought? And we can see in the picture that the beans are very inconsistent. There are some green beans, which means they are immature. There is some foreign material that is evident. In other places where It's very moist, where it's very humid and wet in the harvesting conditions, such as Brazil. We have the opposite problem. We need to dry the beans. And common practices in Brazil include the burning of eucalyptus trees to dry the soybeans down to a content where they can be transported. And so the damaged beans really tell a story of nutrient composition, of consistency, and sustainability at the same time. We've been tracking the amount of damaged beans in U.S. soy and Brazilian soy since 2017. Here on this graph, we're showing the 3-month running average of total damage of beans from Brazil in blue and the United States on the bottom. And we can see that soybeans from Brazil have 5 times the amount of damage, or the frequency of damage, as those from U.S. origin. We took multiple samples of beans from the United States, Brazil, and Argentina, and took a look at the nutrient composition of damaged and undamaged beans. Now remember, the beans coming from South America had 5 times the amount of damage. But what was done in this trial was the beans were separated individually into high-quality beans and damaged beans. And then we looked at the nutrient composition in terms of protein and digestible sugars. We found something very interesting. The damaged beans, whether they came from the United States, Brazil, or Argentina, tended to have higher crude protein than the high-quality beans. How can this be the case? Well, remember, we don't actually measure crude protein. The common methods of measuring crude protein actually measure nitrogen. And what our hypothesis is that this higher measurement of crude protein in damaged beans is actually measuring non-protein nitrogen. One other factor to look at is that the high-quality beans from the United States have higher levels of sucrose and stachyose, digestible sugars. In fact, whether they were damaged beans or not, the U.S. origin had higher stachyose and sucrose, giving higher metabolizable energy to all species. The best way to determine the digestibility of essential amino acids and calories in animal diets is to feed it to the animal, to do an animal trial. And in fact, even in vitro methods depend on statistics with digestibility trials. So for example, we may measure the solubility of crude protein and relate it to digestibility of amino acids. This is not very accurate. More accurate methods, such as near-infrared spectroscopy, can look at the chemical bonds in the sample and correlate that with the results of animal trials. So animal trials are still needed, but by measuring side by side the quality of the ingredients in the diet, such as soybean meal, we can relate the NIR in vitro results with in vivo results from those animal trials. And so building up a database allows us to what's called calibrate an NIR machine so that it can read the values of the nutrient composition of soybean meal and predict the digestible amino acid and calories in the sample. In order to determine the digestibility of nutrients in any animal, the animal's digestive system needs to be taken into account. Here's a picture of a cow. Its digestive system is different. It has a rumen. It is different than what are called monogastrics, which only have one stomach, such as humans and fish and chickens. Once you understand the digestive system of the animal, you can more precisely define what is meant by digestible and metabolizable amino acids and calories. We can also take a look at the fate of the nutrients. Those nutrients that are not digested by the animal, not absorbed and utilized for animal protein production, are used by microbes in the microflora in the digestive system. Those bacteria produce greenhouse gases and waste material, such as nitrogen and phosphorus compounds, that could end up in fertilizer or in groundwater, depending on how well the animals are managed. And so understanding digestibility is also a way of understanding sustainability in animal production. If the nutrients are more available to the animal for production of milk or meat or eggs, then less nutrients are available for the production of greenhouse gases and for the production of bacteria. If you ask animal producers or animal feed producers what's the most important factor to consider in formulating diets, cost comes up more than anything else. Yes, it is important to meet the nutrient requirements of animals, but the objective is to lower cost. In fact, the famous quality engineer Junichi Taguchi once said that cost is more important than quality, but quality is the best way to reduce cost. We've been measuring the quality of soybean meal for many years and tracking the value of U.S. soybean meal versus soybean meal from other origins such as Brazil and Argentina. And what we're finding is that soybean meal from the United States is worth more than $20 to $25 per metric ton of soybean meal, more than soybean meal from other origins. Here's how we derive that. Recall that there were higher amounts of digestible sugars in U.S. soy versus soy from other origins. This means there's more metabolizable energy for animals and for animal feed. And so we're able to lower the cost of the diet by first providing more of the digestible calories to the animals. And this is worth at least $10 per metric ton of soybean meal, given today's prices of fat and vegetable oils that would replace those calories in the diet. The second has to do with the digestibility of amino acids and the essential amino acids. U.S. soybean meal has higher levels of digestible amino acids than soybean meal from other origins. This is also worth an additional $10 per metric ton of soybean meal, considering the prices to supplement the diet with synthetic amino acids such as methionine, lysine, threonine, tryptophan, valine. U.S. soybean meal provides all of these essential nutrients in the right proportions. And the third factor to consider is the consistency of amino acids and calories. When ingredients are not consistent, nutritionists use safety margins. These safety margins penalize the ingredients. It reduces the assumed amount of calories and amino acids in the diet. But when nutritionists are using U.S. soybean meal, they don't need to use safety margins. They don't need to reduce or penalize the nutrient composition. And so the difference in diets formulated with U.S. soybean meal and less variance, more consistency, provide at least an additional $5 per metric ton of soybean meal in value. And so from calories, there's $10 per metric ton. From amino acids, there's $10 per metric ton. And from the consistency, there's $5 per metric ton. And that's how, in most animal feeds, we achieve greater than $25 per metric ton of additional value when nutritionists use U.S. soybean meal versus soybean meal from other origins. When making any important business decision, such as the decision to purchase high-value soybeans and soybean meal, you should consider how this decision generates value to the bottom line of your business. The ultimate value of soybeans and soybean meal is measured by more than just crude protein. U.S. soy delivers superior animal performance with the lowest total cost because of the optimal nutritional bundle, low damage, and reliability. In 2023, we conducted a survey of people in various roles across the soybean supply chain. These included growers, buyers, sellers, crushers, nutritionists, feed mills. And the people in these roles were asked, one, what is your role in the supply chain? And second, given your role, what is critical to quality? Here are the results. Here are some of the responses we received from the people surveyed in their roles across the supply chain of soybeans. These included responses from farmers, buyers, sellers, crushers, nutritionists, and feed mills, and their responses were reflective of their role. What was critical to quality for a buyer is that the product meets standards. For nutritionists, it was consistency and the nutritional bundle. For the feed mill, it was on-time delivery. So we collected all of these responses and then selected key words from each of the responses. After the key words were picked out of the responses from the survey, we were able to make a word cloud, where the largest words reflect those words that were most commonly used, regardless of the person's role across the supply chain. As you can see, sustainability, reliability, consistency, and nutrient values were among the most common words used in all of the responses. From the survey, we can determine how priorities change across the value chain, whether it's growers, buyers, crushers, sellers and traders, feed mills, and nutritionists. Factors such as consistency, sustainability, value, and particularly nutrient value, and reliability all emerged as common factors common to various players across the supply chain as what is critical to quality in their role. The top three differentiators for U.S. soy quality are composition, consistency, and sustainability. Let's review these three. When we talk about composition, we're talking about the digestibility of essential amino acids and calories. And the proportion of some of these amino acids also plays a critical role to balance the diet for modern animal genetics. Consistency. Having reliable soybean meal means that nutritionists can formulate without needing to use safety margins. This helps further reduce the cost of feed and improve quality at the same time. Now let's talk about how animal producers and feed mills are capturing the value of sustainability when they choose to use U.S. soy. U.S. soy has the lowest carbon footprint versus other origins, demonstrating the commitment of our farmers in advancing UN Sustainability Development Goal number 2, zero hunger. Sustainable U.S. soy, SUSS. The logo is currently featured on more than 1,000 SKUs from 70 countries across the globe. U.S. forest land is up, while cropland is down between 1997 and 2017. Land use decreased 35% per ton of soybean meal since 1980. Energy use decreased 42% per ton since 1980. The U.S. Soy Sustainability Assurance Protocol, SSAP, is one of the largest sustainability verification programs in the agriculture industry. SSAP is recognized by Consumer Goods Forum, FIFAC, Global Seafood Alliance. SSAP has been expanded to allow the transfer of SSAP certificates up to 4 times. 60% of all soy exports from the U.S. had an SSAP certificate as of the end of 2022. Between now and the year 2050, global protein demand is expected to increase 20% as the population approaches 10 billion people. We need more high-quality and sustainable protein than ever before to nourish that number of people, and we must produce it more sustainably to preserve our planet. Animal production continues to make important contributions to the global food supply, and as a result, animal feeds have become an increasingly critical component of the integrated food chain. Livestock products account for about 30% of the global value of agriculture, and 19% of the value of food production, provides 34% of protein and 16% of energy consumed in human diets. Meeting consumer demand for more meat, milk, and eggs and other livestock products is dependent to a major extent on the availability of regular supplies of appropriate, cost-effective, and safe animal feeds. Global soy consumption is now over 1 million metric tons per day. Over the last 30 years, world demand for soy meal has grown by 6 million metric tons a year, from 69 million metric tons in 1990 to 249 million metric tons in 2020. Extending that trend line out the next 30 years to meet demand for sustainable protein, the world would need another 179 million metric tons of soybean meal, putting total demand at approximately 430 million metric tons by 2050. We hope you've learned how U.S. soy can nourish your business. It's good for animals and great for you and the planet. The three driving values of the nutrient bundle, the consistency, and sustainability create value for many players across the supply chain, from the farmers who produce sustainable U.S. soy, the buyers and traders who move it all around the world, the nutritionists and feed mills that are confident in using it for their animal feeds, the animal performance, and the consumers all benefit from U.S. soy being in the animal production supply chain. Thank you and have a great day.
はい。トムさん、ありがとうございました。冒頭に申し上げました通り、ご質問がある場合は、Q&A の方に書き入れをお願いいたします。今回はチャットをちょっと、我々のパネルリストの方で使いますので、申し訳ございません。Q&A の方に、書き入れをお願いいたします。それでは次に、USEC のサステナビリティの担当ディレクターであります、アビー・リンさんに、米国大豆のサステナビリティについてプレゼンをしていただきます。
Hi, my name is Abby Rinne. I'm the Director of Sustainability for the U.S. Soybean Export Council. And I'm very excited to be here with you today to talk about U.S. soy sustainability. I grew up on a farm in the Midwest of the U.S., so this topic is near and dear to my heart. Today, we're going to cover several different topics related to sustainability. But first, we're going to do a little bit of a history lesson within the U.S. on sustainability. So this picture, you may or may not be familiar with it. It is a picture of the Dust Bowl in the United States. In the late 19th and early 20th century, there was a really large settlement rush in the U.S., and settlers were provided with 64 hectares of public land, and that led to a massive influx of new farmers in the Great Plains of the U.S. So these farmers were not familiar with the area, they weren't familiar with the ecology, and they plowed up grasslands in order to put in fields of wheat. And they did deep plowing, and so they would plow up to 51 centimeters deep and then go over that plowed land with harrow to create a really fine seedbed. It was thought that that deep plowing would aid in water retention. In the early 1930s, a drought started. And the deep plowing didn't aid in water retention. In fact, it was the exact opposite. And the grasses that had been in place prior weren't there to hold the soil in place. And then that resulted in really large dust storms. And what happened was that those dust storms carried the topsoil of the Great Plains as far east as Washington, D.C. and New York City, which is about 2,600 kilometers away. Because of these dust storms and the Dust Bowl in the U.S., on April 27, 1935, Congress passed Public Law 7446, and it established the Soil Conservation Service as a permanent agency in the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The role of the Soil Conservation Service's technical experts was to work on advancing scientific understanding of erosion practices and to develop effective conservation practices. The service is still in place today, though it's now known as the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and they continue to work with America's farmers, ranchers, and forest landowners to conserve the nation's soil, water, air, and other natural resources. So fast forward to today, you can see that deep plowing, that harrowing to create a fine seedbed has been really replaced with more conservation tillage efforts. The picture in the top left, you can see this is an example of no-till soybeans planted into cover crops. No-till is when a field is not tilled from harvest one year to planting the next year. And cover crops are a crop that's planted in the non-growing season. These create roots within the soil. They're not harvested. but they are terminated so that the next season's crop can be planted. So both of these efforts really aid in water retention, in soil erosion, eliminating soil erosion, and decreasing the number of passes that have to be taken by a tractor over the field. The image on the right-hand side, you can see an example of grass waterways. These are efforts to reduce runoff, sorry about that, reduce runoff from fields and aid in eliminating soil erosion. And then the last picture that I wanted to cover is on the lower left, and this is an example of a conservation reserve program, which is a program offered by the Natural Resources Conservation Service to remove productive agricultural ground from production for 10 to 15 years. And these are contracts that farmers enter into with NRCS. In addition to these conservation tillage practices and programs that farmers enroll in, U.S. soybean farmers are using some of the latest technology. If you ever get the opportunity to ride in a tractor in the U.S., you'll see far more screens than you might imagine. So farmers are using GPS, variable rate seeding, and application technology, all part of precision agriculture. And then they're also using drones and satellite information as well. So why is this important? It's important to note that 95% of US farms are family farms. Most of these farms are passed down through multiple generations, and that soil is their largest asset. So they know that it's important to improve that soil and maintain it for the next generation. Everyone is very interested in the environmental impact of the products that they are purchasing or using. So we worked with Blanc Consultants, which is a Netherlands-based consultancy, to evaluate the carbon footprint of various sources of protein, or I'm sorry, of soybeans, proteins, and oils. The analysis is based on life cycle assessment methodology, and that's the research method for evaluating the environmental impact of a product through its entire life cycle. It assesses all the stages in the production, marketing, and use of a product, from raw materials, packaging, and transport, consumption, and waste processing. And it's called cradle to grave. So an LCA reveals the environmental impacts where they occur in the life cycle of a product, and those are known as hotspots. So this chart shows the carbon footprint of whole soybeans produced from several different countries. Some of these are more focused towards sourcing European countries, but really the US, Argentina, and Brazil are likely the three countries that you want to look at. And you can see here, when looking at the cultivation, which is that bluish color, transport, which is orange, and then land use change, which is gold, you can see a significant difference in the carbon footprint or the environmental impact of soy raised in these countries. Countries that have advanced production practices, focus on precision agriculture and conservation tillage, all have a similar impact in the cultivation. Transport, you can see a slight difference. The United States has a really efficient infrastructure that focuses heavily on barge and rail, whereas Brazil they use primarily trucks to get soybeans to the point of export. But then really the biggest difference is in the land use change. You can see that the deforestation that you've likely heard about in Brazil and Argentina has had a huge impact on the environmental impact of the soy. This land use change evaluates the deforestation and conversion that's occurred in the last 20 years, which is the industry standard for evaluating land use change. Looking at various oils as another comparison, you can see that we have a comparison of US soybean oil, Canadian rapeseed oil, palm oil from Indonesia and Malaysia, and then sunflower oil from Ukraine. When you combine the cultivation, the processing, and the land use change, US soybean oil is still significantly lower than these other competing oils. Sorry about that. And then lastly, looking at various protein sources. So if you wanted to evaluate, eliminating soy and using a different protein source, You may look at peas, chickpeas, or broad beans. So here you can see a comparison of different countries of those types of protein sources. And again, the US soy has a significant lower carbon footprint than many of the other protein options available. So how can you use this information when evaluating your Scope 3 emissions? You're likely hearing about Scope 3 emissions, which are the indirect emissions in your supply chain, the impact from the goods and the materials that you purchase. We encourage the use of the Global Feed LCA Institute database. The GFLI gathers LCA data to evaluate the impact of food and feed ingredients. And all of the data in the GFLI database is reviewed for alignment of methodology with the FAO LEAP and EU PEFSR guidelines. So it goes through a review process, meets those requirements, and then is available for publication within the database. The GFLI can be used to compare the environmental footprint of various sourcing countries of soy to calculate your product's environmental footprint. So questions about US soy sustainability really started over 10 years ago. We started getting questions, particularly from Europe, about how soy was raised in the US. We were answering questions one-off, and then there was we recognized we needed to formalize our responses to these questions. What was developed was the US Soy Sustainability Assurance Protocol. It's a scheme designed to meet sourcing guidelines in the international market. It looks at US production in aggregate, and it includes third-party audits. So there are about 20,000 audits conducted annually by the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Included in the SSAP are continuous improvement goals, which I'll cover shortly. The 4 directives or chapters within the SSAP are biodiversity and high carbon stock. These are the regulatory obligations to maintain wetlands, grasslands, forests, and enhance biodiversity in the US. Production practices, these include those that enhance our environment as well as those that protect our natural resources while increasing production efficiency. Public and labor, health, and welfare, we have numerous laws in the US that protect our labor force as well as the general public. This is where we cover things like fair labor standards, equal employment opportunity, abolition of forced labor, Clean Water Act laws. And then last, the 4th directive is continuous improvement. These are the efforts that farmers are choosing to implement on their farm to really improve their operations. This includes programs offered by NRCS, training and information sharing that farmers do on a regular basis. In 2014, the US soy industry determined that they wanted to make a statement of what types of improvements they wanted to make. So they developed 4 continuous improvement goals that are based on a year 2000 benchmark and tracked using field to market metrics. That by the year 2025, US soybean farmers aim to reduce land use impact by 10%, reduce soil erosion by 25%, increase energy use efficiency by 10%, and reduce total greenhouse gas emissions by 10%. And I should note that 2014, when those goals were developed, is not when soybean farmers started working towards making improvements. Here you can see the environmental impact of soy production from 1980 to 2020. You can see a crop yield increase in tons per hectare of 130%, while the land use, soil erosion, energy use, and greenhouse gas emissions all decrease. So it really shows that farmers are being more efficient in their production. This slide really demonstrates the importance of sustainable sourcing of soy globally. When the SSAP was developed, the first year we had less than 7,000 metric tons that were shipped with an SSAP certificate. And last year we closed at almost 44.5 million metric tons that were shipped with a certificate. So it's really important to global customers that they're sourcing sustainable soy from the US in their purchases. So where are those shipments going? Here you can see by region and percentage of their total exports from the US, what percentage of those exports have an SSAP certificate? In Northeast Asia, which covers Japan and South Korea, 92% of all of the exports, soy exports from the US have an SSAP certificate. So that really shows that this region is committed to sustainability. Some key achievements for the SSAP is that it's accepted by international sourcing standards. Some of these groups include FEFAC, the European Feed Manufacturers Federation, the Farm Sustainability Assessment by the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative, where we have gold equivalency, QS, which is a German standard, Global Gap and Best Aquaculture Practices, both aquaculture standards. And then in 2020, we had an inclusion in the sourcing standards for the Tokyo Olympics. So how do you obtain an SSAP certificate? First off, speak to your supplier. You want to make sure that you want to indicate to the supplier you're purchasing from that an SSAP certificate is important in your sourcing. Make sure you're having those conversations, and do know that SSAP certificates are transferable. So they can transfer those certificates to your company in your name. So this is a fairly new offering. So it might take a little bit of learning, but it is available. Coming soon, something that we are working on is on that SSAP certificate, being able to include the carbon footprint from the GFLI on the certificate so that you know the impact that the production of the soy you're purchasing has had on the environment. So that'll be coming soon. We're currently finalizing some calculations, but look for that in the near future. Companies that are sourcing their soy with an SSAP certificate have the opportunity to use the Sustainable US Soy logo. You can see here that it's used on a variety of different products. It's currently used in 18 different countries. Within Japan specifically, it's used by 19 companies on 350 different products. Globally, it's used by 93 companies on over 1,000 different products. The requirements to use the logo are that at least 60% of a product's soy has to have an SSAP certificate. There's a licensing agreement that must be signed. The artwork has to be approved, and then there's annual audits that are conducted to make sure that each company is meeting those requirements. And then a fairly new offering is a Fed with Sustainable US Soy. So this logo was specifically developed to be placed on meat so that companies that are feeding Sustainable US Soy can use this logo as well. Same type of requirements. 60% of the soy in a feed ration has to have an SSAP certificate, licensing agreement, artwork approval, and annual audits. U.S. soybean farmers are committed to sustainability. They have a long legacy and future generations that they're working for, and that is to deliver the most sustainable soy in the world. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, and I look forward to all of your questions. Thank you.
はい、ありがとうございました。3人のプレゼンいかがだったでしょうか。これからQ&A に移らさせていただきますが、ご質問いただいた中から時間の都合でいくつか、選ばさせていただきました。まず1番目、マーティさんに質問です。今年の大統領選で政権が変わった場合、エネルギー政策は変わると思うが、再生可能バイオディーゼル燃料として使用される大豆油の使用はどのような影響が考えられますか。マーティさん、お願いいたします。
We've been getting this question quite a bit. There's There's been some new reporting about this at one of the big biofuel conferences that's occurring right now. And their conclusion is similar to ours. Whether you have a Republican administration or a Democratic administration after this election, there's going to be pros and cons for the biofuel sector and the energy sector in general. But specifically to this question, if it's a new administration, a Trump administration, there's limited things that they can do with the RFS. The RFS has been around for 15 years. It's a very durable policy. It has been tested in our courts a lot. And so there's not going to be very much change. A lot of the demand for biodiesel and renewable diesel comes from the RFS and the California LCFS. Now, the election won't change any of the California policies with respect to the LCFS. So we don't expect big changes there if you get a Trump administration. I think the area where you'll see the most changes is in how much expansion we have in oil and natural gas development, drilling new wells and developing offshore leases, and also in the policies that promote electric cars over internal combustion engines. I think those are going to be the areas that see the biggest impact. And right now we project that the lower demand for biofuels because of conversion to EVs, we think that that's 10 years off under the Biden administration policies anyway, before it has a really big impact on total motor gasoline use in the US. So really, there's not going to be too much of a change.
はい、どうもありがとうございました。先ほどのプレゼンの中で、再生可能バイオディーゼル燃料用として、アメリカは、使用済み食用油や菜種油、パーム油、それから牛脂など、さまざまな油を輸入してますが、これが大幅に増加しているという画面を見せていただきましたが、これにより大豆油生産の採算が相当悪化しているのではないでしょうか。そしてまた、搾油能力増大計画にも影響はありませんかという質問です。
So the increase in imports to the U.S. of used cooking oil, other waste greases, and fats and tallows, that is right now permissible under all of our rules and regulations. There's a lot of renewable diesel and biodiesel and soybean crush industry representatives spending time in Washington right now because of the big increases in those imports. They're trying to find out, what can be done to reduce some of those imports so that more U.S. soy oil would be used. Because of WTO constraints and other trade constraints, it's not really clear that there's going to be much change to that soon. So a year ago, if I would have been having this conversation with you, I would have been saying our expectation is for the U.S. to become a net importer of soybean oil. And I think for the next couple of years, we do not have that view. We think that there's some U.S. soybean oil now that can export because so much fat and tallow is coming to the U.S. part of the big increase in used cooking oil that's coming from China, it switched from going to Europe to going to the US in the last year because the European authorities opened some investigations into how legitimate the used cooking oil is. We just recently had a report that some food companies in China that fry food and prepare it to sell as meals ready to eat. So this is food that's already prepared, for consumption, that they used to fry 3 batches of food before they would, consider it used and switch over to new oil. And they've been just using the fry oil once and then, using it, recycling it. And so they've increased the turnover of their process to take advantage of the high used cooking oil prices. And that kind of makes sense to me. It's there's not real strict definitions yet of used cooking oil. And until there gets to be some international standards on this, I think this is going to be a problem. So right now we think that there's going to be some US soybean oil that can export. I know Korea has already taken a shipment this year, I believe. That happened pretty recently. And I don't know right now of any proposed crushers that have publicly announced that they're not going to keep proceeding with building their new crush plant. A lot of the crush plants are waiting in line to get their major equipment from Crown Equipment Corporation. There's kind of a waiting list for that. And so not all the new plants are under construction at the same time. So far, we haven't heard of new projects canceling because of the lower crush margins, but it's still kind of early in this crush margin cycle. So that could occur. I think some of the recent announcements that U.S. crush is slightly lower in the last couple months as a result at these low crush margins. I think some of the very old crush plants in the U.S. maybe are taking longer downtimes in their annual maintenance cycles than would typically be the case. In the long run, at these kinds of crush margins, we expect some of the very old plants in the U.S. to actually be shut down, and the new plants will continue to come online.
はい、ありがとうございました。これから天候相場に入っていくわけですけれども、6月、7月、8月、10月ぐらいまで、天候によって相場が荒れると思いますけれども、これまでの、アメリカの中西部では冷涼で雨の多い天候が続いています。今後も続くと予想されていますけれども、今年の作付けは去年よりは遅い。ただし、例年よりは早い。このような状況を踏まえて、最終的な収量の見通しについては、現地ではどのように評価されていますか。また、シカゴの先物相場にはどのように反映されているのでしょうかという質問です。
So we've had challenges in weather for the last 5 years, and we've still had almost trend crops. So crop technology is very good with respect to U.S. production of soybeans. Right now, even though there's some challenges with weather, overall, I think things are okay. We just had a WASDE report issued today, and there's not enough problems in the weather for anybody to want to change the yields or the outlook. So we're sticking at the moment with a trend yield scenario. It's hard to say how this is going to impact prices in Chicago. The floods that some people were concerned with in southern Brazil certainly sounded dramatic, and they were very bad for Rio Grande do Sul, the RGDS, Estado in Brazil. But Brazil is a very big place, and the total reduction in Brazilian soybean production is very small, even though those floods were very big floods in that one area. So I think the rest of the world's pretty good on soybeans. Argentina recovered from its La Nina and has produced a bigger crop that they just finished harvesting. So right now there's not a weather premium, I think, that's being looked at in the Chicago pricing. But we'll wait and see. Like you said, we've got a long time to go. We got most of June, July, August. So there's still plenty of time for a weather scare. But overall, I think things are looking pretty good.
今、ブラジルの話が出たのでお伺いしますけれども、ブラジルの南部で、洪水が発生して、これがブラジル産大豆の輸出への影響、どの程度ございますでしょうか。あるいはブラジル国内で大きな変化が起きているとやに聞いていますが、どういう影響がございますか。
So the floods in Brazil were in the very southern part of Brazil in RGDS, and the dramatic pictures you see in those floods is because the area that flooded has two rivers that come together in a town, and when both of those rivers are flooding, it looks really dramatic. Now they had some bad weather as those floodwaters go down the river and eventually get to the ocean. There were some problems with some port availability, and then you had lower crop. But remember, today in the modern era of Brazil, the soybean production is much further north. The bulk of the soybean production in Mato Grosso and in the estados near Mato Grosso, and those crops, a long time ago, they used to have to go south to the ports in southern Brazil. But a lot of those crops today go north to the Amazon. And so those ports are not affected by these floods that were reported on. So I think the biggest issues for Brazil on their exports are this tax policy issue that I mentioned earlier today, how much they're going to grow next fall, because of their cost of production is going up, so that could impact them. But with respect to their immediate ability to export, I think they still have a lot of export capacity if the price is right. And right now they have a pricing problem because of the new tax.
はい、次に、トムさんに質問ですけれども、アメリカ国内では大豆ミールは、クルードプロテイン、素タンパク含量を基準にしてトレードされていると理解しています。42% から 49% の間というふうに聞いておりますが、アメリカ国内の配合飼料メーカーは年々大豆ミールの素タンパク質含量が低下傾向を示していることについてどのようにお考えでしょうか。例えば何か種子会社に対して 対策を要求しているという動きがございますかという質問です。
Yes, I think and measures should be taken. As I mentioned in my talk, I think that crude protein is not actually commonly used in animal feed formulation. It's the digestible amino acids that are important. Now, if you're purchasing beans and meal on crude protein, then yes, it is important to have standards communicated between buyers and sellers, and the products are meeting those specifications. I think that what's interesting is that we have seen a couple % drop in the crude protein, but the essential amino acids are actually increasing. So this makes the soybeans and the soybean meal more sustainable because the nutrients are able to be digested by the animal. What we hope is that the industry will use measures of the digestibility of crude protein, the digestibility of amino acids and calories as the quality indicators when making purchasing decisions. Thank you.
はい、ありがとうございました。次に、もう一つ質問がございます。アメリカ国内の大豆搾油量が増えて、大豆ミルの大量に発生した場合、主にどういう国に輸出をターゲットにされていますか？特に大きな計画はございますか？という質問です。これはどなたにしたらいいでしょうか？マーティさん。
I can talk about that a little bit, but I'd be happy to hear also from the USSEC team because they spend a lot of time doing that. But when we look at soybean meal demand globally, you have to look at two things. A lot of people make the mistake of only looking at soybean meal and how that transports, but also when you transport whole soybeans, there's an implied trade of soybean meal. Because no soybean can be used until it is crushed. So every place that you export and import soybeans, you're exporting and importing soybean meal. So when you look at both of those together, and you look at where in the world they go everywhere that meat is produced. So it's the entire developed world, all of Asia, all over the Middle East, Europe, all parts of Northern Asia. It basically goes everywhere. Now, I think I'll let USSEC talk about the target countries, but the target crops or the target animals for the soybean meal, I think right now are mostly poultry and aquaculture, because in this higher price environment we have, where we've had food inflation that has been sustained now for a few years all over the world, the better conversion rates of feed into meat by aquaculture and poultry has been favoring those two industries. So I think we're seeing a lot of development in those as opposed to, a lot of development in cattle and pork.
最後の質問になりますけれども、今、入ってきたやつを見ますと、アメリカの搾油工場が増えて、クラッシングが増えますと、大豆の春ですね、ソイビンハルが飼料用の需要もあると思うんですが、これはアメリカ国内でも需要はございますかという質問です。
So I'll talk a little bit about that, but I think, probably Thomas could address it too. In the US, we are producing a lot more meat than we can use. So we have a big meat export program. For us to use more soybean hulls, soybean meal in the US would mean we need to increase our soybean meat exports. Because of the new crush, essentially lowering the price of all meals. So it's having an effect on distillers grains and all the other meals that we produce from wet milling and dry milling. This is an advantage to animal producers in the US that want to increase exports of meat. But as a domestic population, we're not increasing the amount of meat we eat. So we don't need more for domestic consumption. But I could see that the price being favorable in the US may encourage some meat producers to expand operations so that they can export more. We think the bulk of the increased meal and hulls is going to be exported.
トムさん、詳しいと思うんですが、ソイビン春のデマンドというのは、米国内でもございますか？
Sure. In fact, I think we need to re-examine the value of soy hulls throughout the supply chain. Animals are better able to digest, particularly with the help of enzymes in animal feed production. And so this soy hulls as being a byproduct could really be looked at as a value-added product and an opportunity to get more value. Certainly as animal consumption, animal production increases, not just in the United States, but around the world, the soy hulls are part of the soybean meal package, and animal nutritionists are understanding how better to utilize the sugars that come from the fibers in the hulls.
はい、ありがとうございました。それではすいません、時間の都合で本日のウェビナーはこの辺で終了させていただきます。後ほど皆様にはアンケートのリンクをお送りします。今後のこのようなイベントの改善につながりますので、ご協力のほどお願い申し上げます。また、今回のプレゼンのビデオは、ホームページ USSoybean.jp からできるだけ早く公開する予定でございますので、こちらの方もご利用ください。なお、9月にはグレイン、大豆の調達、購入に関するオンライン講習を観察大の教授にお願いしております。毎回2時間程度、週2回、計8回を予定しておりますので、この講習は原料購買、ご担当、あるいは貿易実務を学びたいという方には非常に好評です。そして成績優秀者は来年のアメリカ研修にもご招待という特典もございますので、ぜひこちらの方にもご参加いただければと思います。それでは本日はご参加いただきまして誠にありがとうございました。またの再会を期待しております。Abby, Tom, Marty, thank you very much for attending this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.